Alex had always been content with the simple things in life. He never sought fame, fortune, or the extravagant lifestyle that many of his peers chased after. To him, there was an unmatched satisfaction in the work of his hands. His days were predictable, filled with the clattering of tools, the hum of car engines, and the familiar faces of his coworkers at the small auto service station in the heart of a quiet town. It was a life built on routine, but it was a life that suited him perfectly. The sun would rise early each morning, casting a warm glow over the worn-out asphalt of the parking lot where Alex's workday began. His hands, calloused from years of repairing engines and adjusting car parts, moved with ease. There was an undeniable comfort in the rhythm of the work, in the knowledge that each task completed was one step closer to perfection. He didn't need a lavish house or the most expensive car. The satisfaction came from the work itself, the knowledge that he was making a difference, even if it was just for a few customers who relied on him to keep their cars running. The mornings at the station were usually quiet, especially during the early hours. Alex would sip his coffee as the first few customers trickled in, each with their own little quirks and problems. Some had cracked windshields, others needed oil changes, and then there were those who came in for more complicated issues. Alex didn't mind. The more challenging the problem, the more he felt like he was truly putting his skills to use. He didn't need the praise or recognition. His work spoke for itself. His coworkers, like him, were hardworking men who knew the ins and outs of every car that rolled into the station. There was Tony, the older mechanic who had been working in the field for decades. His hands were a little slower now, but his wisdom more than made up for it. Then there was Mike, the quiet one who had an uncanny ability to diagnose problems just by listening to the engine. And of course, there was Alex's boss, Joe, who had run the station for years, always telling stories of how the place had been thriving long before Alex had joined. Despite their differences, they shared a bond, an unspoken understanding that hard work, no matter how mundane it might seem to others, was worth more than anything money could buy. The conversations were light, sometimes filled with banter about their favorite sports teams, the weather, or the latest gossip in town. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was a good life, and Alex was at peace with it. He didn't know much about his past, nor did he care. Raised by his mother after she moved to the town when Alex was just a boy, he had never known his father. She rarely spoke about him, and whenever Alex asked, her answers were vague. He wasn't a man worth remembering, she would say with a sigh, her eyes distant as if she was reliving a painful memory. Over the years, Alex had stopped asking. It didn't matter to him. His mother had done her best to raise him, and he respected her for that. The absence of his father didn't weigh heavily on his heart. There was no void. His mother, despite her reticence, had given him everything he needed: love, stability, and a sense of pride in their modest, yet fulfilling life. But even with the absence of his father, there was something inside Alex that always felt like there was more to the story, a curiosity that nagged at him now and then, especially when he saw other kids with their fathers. He never mentioned it, not even to his mother, because it didn't seem to matter. She had given him everything he needed to grow into a strong, self-sufficient man. Life, as far as Alex was concerned, was about simple pleasures: a well-earned paycheck, the satisfaction of fixing a car, a hot meal at the end of the day, and the occasional quiet evening with a book or a movie. These small moments were what mattered. He never questioned his path or wondered if there was something more out there. He didn't need much. But that would change, as fate has a way of doing. On one seemingly ordinary day, something happened that would shatter everything Alex knew about himself. It was just another morning, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and fresh engine grease, when an unfamiliar car pulled into the service station. It was sleek, black, and elegant, a stark contrast to the worn vehicles that usually passed through the station. Alex didn't think much of it at first. There were plenty of fancy cars in the world, after all. But as the vehicle came to a stop, and the driver stepped out, Alex felt something stir inside him. The man who got out was older, perhaps in his late 50s, but there was an undeniable power in the way he carried himself. His suit was immaculate, his posture straight, and there was a quiet authority in his eyes. He didn't look like the usual customers who came in for an oil change or a quick repair. As Alex moved to greet the man, he recognized something in him, a familiarity that he couldn't quite place. But before he could give it another thought, the man spoke. "Is Alex here?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. The name sent a shock through Alex's body, though he couldn't explain why. He froze, wondering if it was some sort of mistake. He had never met this man in his life. "I'm Alex," he said, cautiously stepping forward. "How can I help you?" The man looked at him, his eyes narrowing, as if sizing him up. "I'm Richard Wilson," he said. "I've been looking for you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The name was a heavy one. Richard Wilson, one of the wealthiest men in the country, the owner of a massive global corporation. His face appeared in newspapers and magazines all the time. How could this man be looking for him? Alex stood there, speechless, unsure of what was happening. But as Richard Wilson continued to speak, everything began to fall into place. The revelation that would forever change Alex's life was just beginning. Alex stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing, trying to process what he had just heard. The name Richard Wilson echoed in his ears like a distant rumble of thunder, but he couldn't grasp the significance of it, not in this moment. The man standing before him was one of the wealthiest, most influential figures in the world. His company spanned continents, and his name was synonymous with power and success. Yet this man was looking at Alex as though he knew him. Worse, he was calling him by name. For a long second, Alex couldn't speak. The words were stuck in his throat, tangled with a confusion that was both overwhelming and suffocating. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, an honest mechanic who worked hard for his living. What was this billionaire doing in his world? What did he want from him? Richard Wilson didn't seem to notice Alex's hesitation. He was all business, his expression stern but not unkind. "I know this must come as a shock, but please, hear me out. I've been looking for you for a long time," he said, his voice low but steady. Alex blinked, still grappling with the reality of the situation. "What do you mean? You've been looking for me. I don't even know who you are," Alex finally managed to say, his voice shaky. He glanced around, as though hoping his coworkers might suddenly appear to help him make sense of it all. But no one moved. Tony, Mike, and Joe had all gone silent, watching with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Richard smiled, though it wasn't a joyful one. It was a knowing smile, one that hinted at a past Alex was about to uncover. "I understand your confusion," Richard said, his voice softening. "I'm your father, Alex." The words hit Alex like a physical blow. His legs wobbled, and he had to steady himself against the nearest car. His mind whirled with disbelief. His father. He had no father. The man who had raised him, the one who had worked hard to provide for him, was his mother. She had never spoken about his father. And now, here was this stranger, this wealthy, powerful man, claiming to be his father. Alex's thoughts were a jumbled mess. He wanted to laugh, to scream, to ask the man what kind of sick joke this was. But Richard didn't give him time to react. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I assure you, I'm not here to cause you distress," Richard continued, his eyes not leaving Alex. "I've been looking for you because, for reasons beyond your knowledge, you have an important place in my life, a place that I never expected you to fill, but one that you have to be part of now." Alex couldn't speak. His throat had gone dry. The words were on the tip of his tongue, but they wouldn't come out. He wanted to ask why. Why hadn't this man been part of his life? Why hadn't he ever been told anything? Was it some kind of cruel joke, or was this man actually telling the truth? "I didn't know you existed," Richard said, as though reading Alex's thoughts. "Your mother and I, we were young, and things happened. I never meant to leave you, but I wasn't in a position to be a father at the time. I wasn't the man I am today." He paused, his eyes clouding with a distant sadness. "I made mistakes, and because of them, I lost out on so much time with you." Alex's chest tightened. There was a part of him that wanted to push Richard away, to tell him to leave, to deny everything that was being said. But another part of him, something deeper, more vulnerable, wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that his life wasn't just a series of random events, that there was some kind of purpose, some reason he had lived this simple, humble existence. Could this man really be his father? Why now? Alex finally managed to croak. Why after all these years? Why not when I was a kid? Why not when I needed a father? His voice shook with a mixture of anger and hurt. He didn't know if he could trust this man, this stranger who was suddenly claiming to be his father after all these years of absence. Richard's face softened. "I know you have questions. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, and I don't want to force anything on you. But I've spent the last few years trying to make things right. I've been trying to find a way back into your life. The truth is, Alex, I'm not just here because of who you are to me. I'm here because there's something much bigger at stake, something that involves you more than you can imagine." Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what to think. He couldn't fathom how a man like Richard Wilson, someone so far removed from his world, could suddenly be standing here, claiming to be his father. But there was an odd sincerity in Richard's eyes that made Alex hesitate. The pain and regret were real. And as much as Alex wanted to reject it all, a part of him wondered if he had been missing something his entire life. Was this the answer he'd been searching for? "Please," Richard continued, his voice gentle, "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I know that's not something that can happen overnight, but I need you to understand. This isn't just about me wanting a relationship with you. There's something important I need to tell you, something that could change everything for both of us." Alex swallowed hard. The weight of Richard's words hung in the air like an unspoken promise. What could this man possibly want from him? What was it that could be so important that it could change everything? Richard gave a small nod, as though he knew he had to earn Alex's trust, not demand it. "I understand that you're probably overwhelmed. I don't want to push you, but I hope you'll come with me, even for just a little while, so I can explain. I think you deserve to know the truth." A million questions flooded Alex's mind. But above all, he couldn't help but feel the pull of curiosity. Something inside him knew that this moment, this encounter, was a turning point. His life, as ordinary and predictable as it had seemed until now, was about to change forever. But how? And why? Against his better judgment, Alex nodded slowly. "I'll come with you," he said, his voice steady but uncertain. Richard smiled, a slight but genuine smile, and nodded in return. "Thank you, Alex. I promise you, this will all make sense soon." As they walked to Richard's sleek black car, Alex couldn't help but wonder what the truth was that he was about to uncover, and more importantly, what this revelation meant for his future. As the black car roared to life, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of detachment from everything around him. The smell of gasoline that had always been comforting now felt foreign, almost suffocating. The quiet town, the service station where he had spent most of his life, all of it seemed like it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't him. His world, once so clear and predictable, was now clouded with questions. Questions he couldn't seem to shake off. Who was he really? And what was it about this man, Richard Wilson, that made everything seem so uncertain? The drive to the destination was quiet, with only the hum of the engine filling the air. The roads that Alex had driven 1,000 times before now seemed unfamiliar, as though he were seeing them for the first time. The landscape outside the window blurred by in flashes of green and brown, but inside, Alex's mind was in overdrive. He couldn't stop thinking about the implications of what had just happened. His father, Richard Wilson. The words echoed in his mind, He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, a mechanic with a modest life. Yet, here was a billionaire, someone who could change the course of his entire existence with just a few words. He glanced at Richard, who was driving in silence. The older man's face was calm, collected, but there was something about the way his hands gripped the wheel that made Alex think there was more beneath the surface, as if he too was trying to keep himself steady in the face of this strange meeting. Alex didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask so many questions, but every time he opened his mouth, he found himself closing it again. What could he possibly say? Why didn't you ever try to find me? Seemed too simple. Why now? Felt too obvious. He wanted to understand, but there was no way to make sense of it. The truth was, nothing about this situation was making sense. After what felt like an eternity, Richard finally spoke. I know this is difficult, Alex. I know you have so many questions, and I know that you're angry. You have every right to be. I haven't been the father you needed, but I'm here now. I'm here to make things right. His voice was soft, yet there was an unmistakable strength behind it. Richard's eyes never left the road, but Alex could tell that he wasn't just talking to fill the silence. He was trying to bridge a gap that had existed for a lifetime. Alex swallowed hard. He couldn't ignore the knot in his stomach. Anger, confusion, and something else, something he didn't want to acknowledge, were bubbling up inside him. What kind of man just abandons his family and then shows up years later, claiming to want to make things right? Was it guilt? Was it a sudden need for redemption? Or was there something more to it? Make things right. Alex finally spoke, his voice strained. You show up after all these years, and now you want to make things right. What does that even mean? His words came out sharper than he intended, but he couldn't help it. There was so much resentment building inside him, and he needed to let it out. Richard let out a sigh, but it wasn't one of frustration. It was a sigh that carried with it years of regret, of mistakes made and time lost. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quietly. I don't expect you to understand everything all at once, but I want you to know that I'm here because I believe it's time for you to understand the truth about who you are and what your life really means. The words were heavy, and they hung in the air between them like a thick fog. Alex felt his heartbeat quicken. This wasn't just about a father reconnecting with his son. This was something bigger, something more important than he could grasp. As they approached the outskirts of town, the landscape changed. The modest homes and small businesses were replaced by tall, gleaming buildings. The streets grew wider, and the signs of wealth became unmistakable. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. Where was this man taking him? Was this where he truly belonged? The car finally pulled up to a large estate, a mansion so extravagant that it seemed out of place in the middle of the city. The high stone walls, the wrought iron gates, and the perfectly manicured grounds, it all felt so foreign to Alex. This wasn't the world he knew. This was a world of wealth, privilege, and power. As Richard parked the car and turned off the engine, he looked over at Alex. I know this is a lot, but trust me, you need to see this for yourself. Alex stepped out of the car, his legs feeling heavy. The grandeur of the estate felt suffocating, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely out of place. He was used to grease-stained overalls and the smell of car parts. He was used to the simple life he had carved out for himself. But this was something else entirely. Richard led him through the massive front doors into a grand foyer that seemed to echo with the history of the place. The marble floors gleamed, and the chandeliers above sparkled with the kind of elegance Alex had only seen in movies. Everything about this house screamed power and wealth. Everything about it made Alex feel small, insignificant, and out of place. This is your home, Richard said, his voice reverberating in the vast entryway. This is where you belong. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He had never known anything like this. His entire life had been spent in a small, comfortable world, and now he was standing in the middle of a palace, feeling completely lost. He turned to Richard, his voice barely a whisper. "What is this? Why are you showing me this?" Richard paused for a moment before answering. "I'm showing you this because this is the life that's waiting for you. This is your birthright, Alex. You were always meant for more than what you had. More than the life of a mechanic in a small town. Your name, it carries weight. And you need to understand the significance of it. You are the heir to a legacy that goes far beyond anything you've ever known." Alex shook his head in disbelief. "I don't want any of this," he said firmly, his voice shaking with emotion. "I don't care about your legacy. I don't care about your money or your power. I don't want to be a part of this world. I'm happy with the life I've built. Why couldn't you just let me be who I am?" Richard's eyes softened with understanding. "I never wanted to take that away from you. I didn't want to disrupt your life. But you need to know the truth. There's more to you than you could ever imagine. And now, it's time for you to take your place in this world, whether you want it or not." As the words sank in, Alex felt a mix of anger and confusion. He wanted nothing to do with this world of power and wealth. He wanted nothing to do with the legacy Richard was offering him. But something inside him, something deep and buried, began to stir. Was it possible that this was where he truly belonged? Could he really walk away from everything he had known and step into a new world? The question swirled in his mind, and for the first time, Alex wasn't sure what the right answer was. He had always prided himself on knowing who he was, but now everything was in flux, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth, whatever it was. Richard stood beside him, waiting, as if giving him time to absorb the enormity of what was being said. But no matter how hard Alex tried to ignore it, the reality was clear. The life he had known, his humble, ordinary life, was a far cry from the life that awaited him now. And the question was no longer whether he wanted it. The question was, could he ever truly escape it? Alex stood in the grand foyer, the weight of everything Richard had said pressing down on him like a physical force. The mansion that had once seemed so impressive now felt cold, distant, and almost oppressive. He couldn't fathom how a life that had once been so simple, so rooted in small-town routine, could have been so intricately connected to something so vast and overwhelming. He had lived his entire life with the belief that who he was didn't depend on wealth, status, or legacy. And yet here he was, standing in the middle of a world he didn't belong to, confronted by a truth that shook the very foundation of his identity. Richard stood beside him, his presence like a looming shadow. He had said everything that Alex had always feared, that he was part of something far greater than the world he had known, something tied to a legacy that spanned generations. His thoughts were jumbled, trying to make sense of it all. The life of a mechanic, of hard work and simple pleasures, seemed so far removed from this gilded existence Richard was offering. How could he just step into this world as though it were his? How could he accept a life that had always seemed so alien to him? Richard's voice broke through his thoughts. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly, his tone gentle but insistent. "But I need you to understand. This is who you are. You can deny it, you can run from it, but it's in your blood. You have the opportunity to change the world, Alex. To do things that most people only dream of." Alex's heart raced at his words. Change the world. Was he supposed to believe that? He had spent so many years trying to find meaning in the simplicity of his life, helping people through his work, finding satisfaction in the little things. The thought of suddenly being thrust into a position of power and influence, of making decisions that could affect the lives of so many, felt both terrifying and alien. "I don't need to change the world," Alex finally said, his voice firm, though a knot of uncertainty lingered in his chest. "I'm fine with the world I've built. I'm happy where I am." Richard's gaze never wavered. "I understand that, Alex, but this is bigger than just you or me. You're part of something much larger. And there are people, good people, who need you, people who don't have the opportunities you've had, people who rely on the decisions you make." Alex turned away, pacing the length of the room. The idea of being responsible for so many lives, so much influence, felt suffocating. He had always admired simplicity. The days of working with his hands, of fixing broken cars, and seeing the tangible results of his labor had always been his way of feeling connected to the world. This felt like an impossible expectation to live up to. "I don't know if I can do this," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never asked for this life. I've never wanted it." Richard followed him, his steps slow but purposeful. "I know. I didn't want to throw this at you, either. But the truth is, Alex, this world, the world I come from, has a way of pulling people into its orbit. It's not always a choice. There's a responsibility you've inherited, whether you want it or not. And if you walk away from it, you'll never really be free." Alex stopped, his back to Richard, his hands gripping the edge of a polished marble table. The words hung in the air like a weight he couldn't lift. "What does that mean? If I leave this place, I'll never be free." Richard was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost weary. "This legacy isn't just about money or power, Alex. It's about influence, yes, but it's also about protecting people, about helping the underprivileged, about ensuring that the world remains balanced. There are forces at play, forces that want to exploit people like you. And if you don't step up and take your place, there's a chance those people could suffer." Alex's head swam with the implications of what Richard was saying. He had always prided himself on being independent, on being able to live without needing anyone's help. He wasn't interested in politics or wealth or influence. He just wanted to live his life without the weight of expectations. But Richard's words made him wonder if there was more to this than he could see. Could he really walk away from it all? Could he let the world continue on its course, knowing that his choices, his refusal to act, could lead to suffering? "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Alex asked, his voice hoarse with frustration. "Why wait until now? Why let me live this ordinary life?" Richard paused, his eyes softening as if the question had cut deeper than Alex realized. "I didn't want to take that from you. I didn't want to force you into something you weren't ready for. I wanted you to have the chance to choose your own path, Alex. But the truth is, I've watched you, watched how you've lived your life. And I know you're capable of so much more. This isn't about me. This is about you finding your purpose." Alex shook his head, turning to face Richard. "My purpose," he repeated incredulously. "What is that supposed to mean? I've had purpose all my life. I've worked hard. I've helped people. What else is there?" Richard stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You've had purpose, yes, but your purpose has been limited by your circumstances. You've lived within the boundaries of what you knew. But what if you could change those boundaries? What if you could break free from them and do something that no one else could? You could build something bigger than just a mechanic shop, Alex. You could build a future that lasts." Alex's chest tightened. His mind raced with images of what that future might look like. Power, wealth, the ability to shape lives. It was too much responsibility. He had never asked for any of this. And yet, in the quiet corners of his heart, he felt something stir, a flicker of curiosity, of longing. Could he really make a difference? Could he be part of something bigger than himself? Could he be the one to change things for the better? "I don't know if I can be that person," Alex said, his voice shaky. "I don't know if I can live up to whatever this is." Richard placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "No one is asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to change overnight. What I'm asking, Alex, is for you to believe in yourself. You have the power to change the world. But you have to want it, and you have to believe that you're worthy of it." The words felt like a weight being lifted from his shoulders. Believe in himself. Could he? Had he ever truly believed in his own potential? He had always been content to remain small, to live within his means. But Richard was right. There was more to him than just a mechanic. He had been given the chance to shape his future, and perhaps for the first time in his life, it was time to take control of that future. Alex stood still, the weight of Richard's words sinking in. The path ahead was unclear, and the decision he was about to make was one he could never undo. But one thing was certain: he could no longer ignore the pull of something greater. Whether he liked it or not, his life was about to change. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. As the silence between them stretched on, Alex felt something shift within himself. The enormity of what lay ahead was still terrifying, but for the first time, he felt a spark of something else. Hope. It was small, almost fragile, but it was there. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could rise to the challenge. But it wouldn't be easy. There would be sacrifices. There would be pain. And there would be doubts. But the road ahead, for better or worse, was his to walk. And with that realization, Alex knew he had taken the first step into a new world. The days that followed were a blur for Alex. He couldn't shake the feeling of being caught between two worlds: the life he had known, the life he had built with his own hands, and the world Richard had revealed to him, a world so far removed from the simplicity and independence he had cherished. The mansion, the wealth, the people with their polished suits and perfect lives, it all felt so foreign. He felt like an intruder in a life he had never asked for, but it was now his, whether he liked it or not. Richard had given him space, allowing him time to process everything. But that only made the questions in Alex's mind grow louder. Could he really walk away from everything? Could he just return to the life he had always known? The life of grease-stained overalls and the hum of car engines? Or was there something more that he had to embrace, something that was bigger than his own comfort? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grand estate, Richard invited Alex to join him for a quiet dinner. The setting was elegant, a stark contrast to the humble meals Alex had grown accustomed to. The soft glow of candles illuminated the long wooden table, and the air was filled with the aroma of fine food. Richard sat at one end of the table, his posture relaxed but still commanding. Alex took a seat across from him, his hands fidgeting nervously with the edge of his napkin. "You've been quiet," Richard said, breaking the silence. "Have you given it some thought?" Alex hesitated. The truth was, he hadn't stopped thinking about it. Every moment, every interaction with Richard, every new revelation about the legacy he had inherited only added to the confusion. He could see the path laid out before him: riches, power, influence. But none of it felt real to him. It felt like a dream he wasn't sure he belonged in. "I've been thinking," Alex said, his voice steady but uncertain. "But the more I think about it, the more I feel lost. You talk about legacy, about helping people, but I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I don't know if I can be the man you want me to be." Richard's eyes softened, but there was no judgment in his gaze. Instead, there was an understanding that went deeper than words. "I never said I wanted you to be someone else, Alex. I only want you to be who you are, but to understand the potential you have. You don't have to take on the world all at once. The power you have is not just in wealth or status. It's in the choices you make. It's in the way you can impact people's lives." Alex looked down at his plate, trying to absorb the weight of Richard's words. He could feel the tension in his chest, a gnawing feeling that he couldn't quite name. The more Richard spoke about purpose and legacy, the more Alex wondered if he was truly capable of stepping into this new life. But deep down, there was a part of him that felt drawn to it, a part of him that wanted to make a difference, not just for himself, but for the people who had never had the chances he'd been given. "I don't know what to do with all of this," Alex admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I've always been content with what I had. I never thought I needed more than that. But now, I don't know if I can turn my back on something this big, something this important." Richard's face remained calm, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. "You don't have to have all the answers now, Alex. All I ask is that you open your mind to what's possible. The choice is yours. But whatever you decide, know that you'll have the strength to make it work. You were born for more than just fixing cars. You were born to shape lives, to leave a mark on this world." The words lingered in the air, a weight that Alex wasn't sure he was ready to carry. He had always thought of himself as just a mechanic. His world had revolved around turning wrenches, fixing broken engines, and making people's lives a little easier. It was simple, straightforward, and satisfying. But now, the idea of being part of something bigger, something that could affect not just his own life, but the lives of countless others, felt overwhelming. After dinner, Alex found himself walking through the vast grounds of the estate, his mind racing. The night air was cool, the scent of fresh grass mingling with the faintest hint of jasmine. The stars above twinkled in the deepening darkness, but Alex felt as though he were standing in the middle of a storm, his thoughts swirling around him like a tornado. He wandered to the edge of the property, where the land met the dense woods that bordered the estate. It was here, standing beneath a massive oak tree, that he found a moment of clarity. The sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, grounded him. For a moment, he wasn't the heir to a massive fortune. He wasn't Richard Wilson's son. He was just a man, trying to make sense of the choices before him. Alex thought back to his mother, the few stories she had shared about his father, and the way she had always encouraged him to follow his heart. She had never spoken ill of Richard, but she had always kept her distance, as if she knew that there was a part of him that wasn't meant for their world. Maybe that's why she had never told him the truth about his father. Maybe she had wanted to protect him from a world that could swallow him whole. But now, the truth was undeniable. Richard was here, and the legacy he had left behind was something that could never be ignored. Alex couldn't erase it. He couldn't unlearn it. It was part of him, whether he wanted it to be or not. "Maybe I was wrong," Alex whispered to the night air. "Maybe I'm not just a mechanic. Maybe there's more to me than I thought." As the words left his lips, Alex realized something that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. He wasn't just afraid of the world Richard had shown him. He was afraid of what he might become if he accepted it. Could he still be the person he had always been, the man who found satisfaction in simplicity, if he embraced a life of power and influence? Was he willing to let go of the comfort of his old life to step into a new one that felt like it could drown him? The fear was real, but there was something else now, something new. A spark of hope, a glimmer of possibility. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt like maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. Maybe he didn't need to reject this new life completely. Maybe he could reshape it, make it his own, and find a way to blend the man he was with the man he was destined to become. The choice wasn't going to be easy, and Alex knew it, but one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The world had given him a chance, whether he was ready for it or not. As he stood beneath the oak tree, looking up at the stars, Alex made a decision. He wasn't going to run from this life. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his future. He was going to face it, all of it, and try to make it his own. He was going to take the first step, even if it was the hardest one he had ever taken. And with that, Alex took a deep breath and walked back toward the mansion, ready to begin a journey that would change his life forever. The path ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but Alex had made a choice, and that choice, for better or worse, would define the rest of his life. The decision to embrace the new life, to step into a world he had never truly known, wasn't easy for Alex. The journey ahead felt like a mountain he was still unsure how to climb, and the weight of the unknown pressed against him every day. But there was something different in his heart now. The fear that had once paralyzed him slowly gave way to a quiet resolve. He no longer saw this as a life that was being thrust upon him, but as a path that, while difficult, was his to walk, one step at a time. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and an overwhelming amount of information that Alex struggled to keep up with. Richard had made it clear from the start that Alex was not to be coddled or shielded from the responsibilities that came with his new position. No, Alex was expected to learn, to adapt, and to take charge. Every morning, he was thrust into the intricate web of the family business, shadowing executives, learning the ins and outs of the corporation, and gradually taking on more responsibility. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was now a part of something much larger, something that could impact the lives of thousands of people, and that weight never left him. But it wasn't just the business world that Alex had to navigate. He also had to come to terms with the person he had become. There was a constant tug-of-war within him, a battle between the man who had spent his life fixing engines and helping people with his hands, and the man who was now expected to make decisions that could affect the lives of entire communities. Every night, as he lay in bed, Alex would stare at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day. Was he doing the right thing? Was he becoming someone he didn't recognize? The line between what he had been and what he was becoming seemed to blur more and more each day. One evening, Richard invited him to a dinner meeting at one of the company's high-rise offices in the city. It was a lavish setting, with sleek, modern furniture and walls lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. Alex sat at the table, surrounded by a group of executives who spoke in jargon and terms he had never even heard before. They discussed mergers, acquisitions, international markets, all things that felt as distant from his reality as the moon. But through it all, Alex remained silent, listening intently, absorbing as much as he could. When the meeting concluded, Richard pulled him aside, his expression unreadable. "You did well today," Richard said, his voice low. "You listened. You asked the right questions. You're starting to get it." Alex nodded, unsure whether he truly understood or if he was simply pretending to keep up. But Richard's approval, however faint, was enough to keep him going. That night, back at the mansion, Alex wandered through the quiet halls, feeling a sense of isolation that he hadn't anticipated. Despite being surrounded by people, business partners, executives, even staff, he felt more alone than ever. No one seemed to understand the inner conflict he was battling. No one saw the man who had once been content with fixing cars, who had found fulfillment in the simplicity of his life. All they saw was the heir to a fortune, a person of influence who was supposed to have it all together. But the truth was, Alex didn't have it all together. He was just as uncertain as he had been before, only now he had a different set of worries. It was late when he found himself back in the estate's large library, a room filled with books he hadn't had the chance to read. As he idly ran his fingers over the spines, one book caught his eye. It was a small, unassuming volume, its cover worn with age. He pulled it from the shelf, and as he flipped through its pages, he realized it was a journal, a collection of handwritten thoughts from someone who had once been in his shoes, someone who had been thrust into a life of wealth and responsibility, but had struggled with the same questions, the same doubts. Alex's heart skipped a beat as he read the words. They spoke to him in a way that no one else had. "I've come to understand that legacy is not just about money or power," the journal began. "It's about making choices that echo through the lives of others, whether they know it or not. It's about finding the courage to step into a role you didn't choose, but one that's been waiting for you all along. It's about finding peace in the chaos and strength in your own uncertainty." The words felt like a lifeline, something he had needed but hadn't known how to find. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt a flicker of understanding. He wasn't alone in this. There had been others before him, others who had struggled with the same weight, and somehow they had found a way to make it their own. The following morning, Alex made a decision. He would stop pretending to be someone he wasn't. He would stop trying to fit into a mold that wasn't his. Instead, he would take what he had learned and use it in his own way, on his own terms. He would no longer try to live up to Richard's expectations of what he should be. Instead, He would carve out his own path, one that blended his past with the future he had yet to fully understand. Over the next few months, Alex began to take charge of certain projects within the company. Slowly but surely, he earned the respect of those around him, not because he was trying to be someone he wasn't, but because he brought something different to the table. He wasn't a polished executive with a slick exterior. He was a man who had worked with his hands, who understood the value of hard work and honesty. And that, it turned out, was what the company needed. A voice that wasn't afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge the status quo, and to make decisions that were grounded in real-life experience. Alex began to change the way things were done. He pushed for more sustainable practices, more ethical business dealings, and greater community involvement. The company had always been about profit, but Alex reminded everyone that there was more to business than just making money. He used his new position of power to champion causes that mattered to him, causes that he had seen firsthand in the small town where he grew up. He became a voice for the underdog, the people who had always been overlooked in favor of financial gain. Richard watched all of this with a quiet sense of pride. He knew that Alex was no longer the young man who had walked into his life uncertain and hesitant. He had grown into someone who had found his own voice, someone who understood that true power wasn't about dominating the world. It was about using that power to make a difference. And then, one day, as Alex stood in a conference room, discussing a new initiative to provide clean water to underdeveloped regions, he looked around at the team of people he had assembled and realized something. He wasn't just part of the company anymore. He wasn't just a mechanic who had been swept into a world he didn't understand. He was the architect of something bigger, something that could change lives in a way he had never imagined. He wasn't alone in this journey anymore. He had found his purpose, and it was rooted in helping others. The man he had once been, the humble mechanic, was still there, deep inside him. But he had learned to combine that man with the person he had become. Alex no longer saw himself as a man caught between two worlds. He was part of both. And in that moment, as he looked out over the city from the top floor of a building that once would have been beyond his reach, Alex realized that he had done more than change his life. He had changed the lives of countless others. And that, to him, was what true legacy was all about. The road had been long, and the challenges had been many, but Alex had found the strength to walk it. And in doing so, he had discovered that sometimes the greatest journey is not the one we set out on, but the one we never expected to take.